Dzień dobry, witam wszystkich z naszego studia. Bardzo się cieszę, że udało nam się po raz kolejny spotkać. Witam wszystkich serdecznie. Ja się nazywam Bartosz Sokoliński. Normalnie jest ze mną również Paweł Pacek, ale niestety Paweł dzisiaj nie mógł być obecny w studio. Jak pamiętacie, 2 tygodnie temu nie udało nam się połączyć z Robertem Zubrinem z Mars Society, niestety z naszej winy, bo pomyliliśmy godzinę. Bardzo za to jeszcze raz przepraszamy, ale dzisiaj już Robert z nami jest również z nami obecny Łukasz Wilczyński. Hello guys.
Hi.
Łukasz, the floor is yours. Please do your job. Robert, thank you for being with us.
Okay, so Robert, before I give you the floor, I will just introduce you shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert is the founder of the organization, the Mars Society. I'm also coming from, and it's also a very known author. So that's a Case for Mars, this is a Polish version, and more recent, Case for Space. And Robert is also an inventor. Yes, he's got many exciting patents on his account. Robert was also a person who fostered the path into the space sector for Elon Musk at the beginning of his career in 2001. But I can say that Robert is also someone that had ignited the spark into the new generation of space advocates like myself, who can proudly call themselves, Robert, you like this, the Zubrin generation. So ladies and gentlemen, with privilege and great happiness, I give you the Robert Zubrin. Robert, the virtual floor is yours.
All right, Łukasz, thank you very much. And Bartosz, thanks for inviting me to be on your broadcast. I'm going to talk about the Case for Space, and I don't know about the Polish edition, but the full title of the English edition is The Case for Space: How the Revolution in Spaceflight is Opening a Future of Limitless Possibilities. And so I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the revolution and the case and the future, all of that, which is a lot to talk about, and opening remarks of 20 to 30 minutes. And but hopefully we'll be able to talk about more of it with questions. And then there's the book, which you can now get in either English or Polish, or Ukrainian for that matter, actually, because it's out in Ukrainian as well. So first of all, the revolution. The revolution is the entrepreneurial revolution. It is most visible with the activities of SpaceX, which in the past 10 years has brought the cost of space launch down by a factor of 5. After it had been stagnant for 40 years, it had been $10,000 a kilogram for 40 years since 1970, and now in 2010, it was still $10,000 a kilogram, but now it's $2,000 a kilogram. And this was done first by introducing more commercial ways of doing business, and then introducing increasing degrees of reusability with the Falcon 9 and then the Falcon Heavy, which Falcon 9 reuses 9 of its 10 engines, and the Falcon Heavy reuses 27 of its 28 engines. And now they're working on the fully reusable Starship, which will be 100% reusable, and in addition will have about double the payload capability of the Falcon Heavy. So it's going to have capabilities of over 100 tons to orbit, which is comparable to the Saturn V moon rocket, but only 1% the launch cost, because instead of being expendable, it's going to be reusable. And the demonstration that this is possible by Musk and his team has set off a wave of emulators. There are a whole raft of would-be commercial launch companies around the world. I know of at least 5 in China that have actually gotten entrepreneurial, the private investment, who frankly right now are trying to work on, and undoubtedly one or more of them will succeed in creating a duplicate capability to the Falcon 9. And, if Starship is successful, they will attempt to duplicate that. And that will keep the competitive pressure on Musk, and he's going to have to keep advancing his technology, and the price of space launch is going to go down even more. We're now at $2,000 a kilogram. If Starship is successful, we'll see $500 a kilogram, and then heading towards $100 a kilogram. And this is going to make all sorts of things in space possible. Things that business plans that people had, which were technically feasible but not commercially feasible, will now become feasible, because not only is the space launch is going to become cheaper, but the spacecraft are going to become cheaper and better, because you see that the cheaper the space launch, the less conservative spacecraft designers need to be. And for the past half century, the wisdom among spacecraft designers is don't use anything that hasn't been used before, because if your launch is going to cost $300 million or more, you're not going to want to save $10 million by using some new subsystem. It's not worth it to lose the whole thing. And so the entire spacecraft is designed with super Cadillac systems, but not only that, proven systems, which means old systems, which means you can't advance technology very much. And so spacecraft technology is going to be unleashed. We're going to have rapid advances. It's going to become lighter, it's going to become cheaper, and it's going to become more capable. And we're already seeing CubeSats that weigh 10 kilograms with capabilities that used to require 1,000 kilogram satellite to do. And we're going to see a lot more of this. And so things like, take orbital research labs. Okay, there's a business plan for you that NASA actually promoted in the 1980s. They say we're going to have a space station, have a space shuttle. You'll be able to take your experiments to the space station and do a research that can only be done in either zero G or the very hard vacuum of space. And there's all sorts of possibilities with that. Well, a few people tried it, but it didn't make much sense commercially, because the cost of the shuttle launch was so much. The cost of using the space station was so much. The bureaucratic obstacles, the permits you needed to do to get permission to do anything on the space station. The fact that the space station was not a project of your company, but of practically the entire world, meant that you couldn't keep your research private. I own a research lab, and I certainly wouldn't want to do commercial research with strangers, my competitors, being able to walk through here anytime they like. It's impossible. So, but here we go. It's going to cost $50 million or so to launch a space station instead of $50 billion. And and so if you count the cost of the station itself, it's maybe $100 million project. Now, $100 million, of course, to most people, including me, is a lot of money, but it's a totally workable amount for a project of a Fortune 500 company. It's well within the budget of many projects done by Fortune 500 companies. And so, we're going to see a Pfizer orbital research lab. And, who knows, a Hyundai orbital research lab, whatever. And this will become a thing, because now the business case makes sense. And orbital hotels will make sense, which didn't before. Bigelow tried it, but it didn't make any sense. There was no way to launch it economically, and certainly no way for people to visit it. But now it's going to become a thing. And intercontinental travel, okay? And because you can go through space from anywhere to anywhere on Earth in less than an hour. This might be limited to port cities so that you can do the launch on platforms a bit offshore to avoid the noise issue. But even so, probably more than half of the world's great cities are on sea coasts, and you'd be able to go to, from Danzig to Australia in less than an hour. There you go. And this kind of thing. Now, here's the thing. This means very large numbers of such vehicles are going to be built, and which means they will be relatively cheap. Musk has told me that he thought he could mass produce Starships at a cost of about $10 million each. Well, okay. But if there's reusable space launch vehicles, that means there's also used space launch vehicles. And if you don't have $10 million to buy a new Starship, maybe you got $5 million to buy a used one. because, if these things are going to be used for intercontinental transport, at a certain point, they'll be regarded as having reached near the end of their useful life. And if you want to buy one of these, or if you and 100 of your friends want to buy a $5 million Starship, okay, that's $50,000 each. Take it to Mars, one way. Keep it. Use it for starter housing on Mars, or after you build your housing on Mars, use it to do asteroid mining, or traveling around Mars, whatever you want. So that's the kind of world we're moving into as a result of this entrepreneurial space revolution. Now, and in terms of when we can get to Mars, I think it will be by the end of this decade. I think the initial missions will still require government space agencies as partners, because this initial exploration of Mars is not a truly commercial kind of thing. But the commercial sector, the entrepreneurial space companies, can make the cost of such a venture for the government so much cheaper that they can readily do it. And if you told NASA right now that they could do a human Mars mission for $1 billion, they would jump at the chance. And yet it could be done profitably for SpaceX to supply such a transport system to support that within that amount of money. They'll be, singing all the way to the bank, because the launch is going to cost them, or there'll be a number of launches required, will probably cost them less than a quarter of that. And so here's how I think this is going to come down. Musk frequently makes over optimistic projections, in particular on schedule, and says he's going to do things sooner than he can really do them. And if you had believed some of his statements, he would have already launched Starships to orbit this year. But I think he'll launch them to orbit next year, and if not next year, then certainly in 2024. And so the reality in 2024 is going to be that you have these fully reusable launch vehicles traveling to orbit on a frequent basis. The Falcon 9s are being launched every 2 weeks right now. You can imagine that. And imagine Starships, which have 5 times the capability of Falcon 9, and actually will cost less to launch, going up every 2 weeks and then every week. In the United States, we're going to have an election in 2024, and whoever gets elected president is going to look to his or her advisors and with this going on and saying, look at these things going up and down. He wants to go to Mars. If we got together with him, could we have people on Mars by the end of my second term? And the answer will be absolutely yes. And will it cost $1 trillion? No. You could do it within NASA's existing budget. There's a bunch of stuff that's needed for a Mars mission that isn't included in the Starship. We need to have surface nuclear power to make the propellant to come home. Because you got the raw materials, carbon dioxide and water, but to turn it into methane and oxygen requires power. We need nuclear power on the surface of Mars. That's kind of hard for Musk to develop because it's controlled materials, but we could develop that. We need Mars spacesuits and Mars vehicles and a bunch of other kinds of things, instruments. We could develop all of that and get together with him, and we could have this by the end of your second term. So I think that's actually what is going to happen. That is what is going to happen. By making the mission feasible, SpaceX is going to make it sellable, and it will sell itself. And now Musk is a risk taker. He could fail. He might take one chance too many. He might skate off the edge of the ice. But at this point, the revolution is unstoppable because he's proven the principle of the thing. He's proven that a well-led entrepreneurial team can do things that for 1/10 the cost that were previously thought necessary in the established aerospace industry, 1/3 the time, and even do things that they had deemed impossible altogether, such as reusable launch vehicles. And so if Musk was to drop out of the picture for whatever reason right now, the revolution goes on. There will be other people who will pick up the flag and carry it forward, both in the West and, it must be said, in the East. No one is going to stop this thing from happening. This is now in motion, and it's a very good thing. It's a very good thing. It's a good thing for a number of reasons that I explain in the book. For the science, for our survival, for the challenge itself and for the future. Science, astronomy, we've learned most of our physics through astronomy, from the laws of gravitation to nuclear fusion. And because the universe is the best lab there is. And with these kinds of launch capabilities, we'll be able to launch space telescopes, both in numbers and sizes and different types, that will absolutely dwarf what we've been able to do with Hubble or what we'll be able to do with Webb. It will be fantastic. We're going to learn fundamental new things about the universe, and there's a lot to learn about the universe. Our laws of physics right now are not coherent. We say that matter and energy cannot be created. As an engineer, I work with that law every day, but it clearly can be created because matter has been created. It's here. So there's physics we don't know. And whenever we discover new laws of physics, we get greatly expanded powers over nature. Okay, this conversation is being done because we understand electromagnetism, and which would be just magic to someone from 300 years ago, and so forth, and energy sources that have become open to us through understanding nuclear fission, and to have a greater understanding of nuclear fusion and so forth is unlimited. And what we'll discover about biology by finding other kinds of life forms, perhaps on Mars, perhaps in Europa. Biology is self-replicating nanomachines. That's what microbes are. And if we could find out what the possibilities are, we can create new systems of this kind, which have unlimited potential. So there's the science, there's our survival, to be able to take charge of this flight traffic of asteroids. Carl Sagan, who I knew, used to say all species either become spacefaring or extinct. And that's because the Earth is in space, and everything in space is moving around at very high velocities, and occasionally they crash into each other and with devastating consequences. And by becoming spacefaring, we'll be able to divert asteroids. And I want to be clear on this point, by the way, because there are some people who misstate the purpose with regard to this issue. They say that, well, we're going into space so that if the Earth is destroyed by an asteroid, there'll be survivors somewhere else, having our eggs in more than one basket. I'm not in line with that argument at all. We're not going into space to desert the Earth. We're going into space to protect the Earth. And the only place that the Earth can be protected is in space. Okay. Because if you want to divert an asteroid, you got to do it while it's still very far out, because the closer it gets, the more difficult it is to push it enough to make it miss the Earth. There's the challenge. I happen to have grown up during the Apollo program, and it's why I became a scientist, and in fact many people in the United States. The number of scientists and engineers in the United States doubled, and in some fields tripled during the Apollo program. And it's all because the Apollo program made science the great adventure. Youth loves adventure. We were young, we wanted to be part of it. And the United States, by the way, has benefited enormously from the intellectual capital that was produced as a result of that. I happen to be an exception among my generation in that I actually ended up working on space stuff. But the rest of those scientists and engineers went off and did the computer revolution. Okay, they went off and discovered the genome and all mapped the genome and this kind of thing. And we're benefiting from these things now. We're benefiting tremendously. The reason why we're able to come up with vaccines for COVID within a year of the appearance of disease, when previous diseases we had to wait centuries to find vaccines. It's because of this advance of scientific knowledge, and it's because of all the people that went into science because of the space program. And so we'll benefit that way. And finally, there is the future. Now, there's two ways to look at the future. There's the ultimate future and there's the near future. And the ultimate future, let's talk about that, because in the long run, that's the most important. If we go into space, it means that humans will not be limited to Earth, and it means that, 300, 500 years from now, there will be thousands of new branches of human civilization, not only on Mars, but on thousands of planets orbiting stars in this region of the galaxy. New branches of human civilization with new languages, new literatures, new traditions, new stories, the new heroes, innumerable contributions to technology and invention, and this is something grand. And if you have it in your power to create something grand, then you should. You say, well, okay, well, fine. We want to create the Star Trek future, and we can do it by going into space. And it's obviously the only way you can do it. But it's of more immediate consequences than that. Because how one conceives the ultimate future affects what we do in the immediate future. Okay, now people looking at the immediate future on Earth today see great perils in various things, of which one of them, of course, the most spoken of is global warming. I think global warming is real, but it does not immediately imperil us this year, or even this decade, or frankly, even this century. Go up another degree or two this century, it will cause certain consequences. It will not destroy human civilization. Resource exhaustion, I do not believe that is real, actually. Our resources right now are greater than they've ever been in human history, and they're growing at a greater rate than they are for in human history. But that was also true through the 20th century. At every point, that was true in 1914. 1914, people were richer than they ever were before in history. So what was it that caused Europe to practically destroy itself in 1914 and then again in 1939? It wasn't climate change. Nope. And it wasn't resource exhaustion or overpopulation. People talk about that one too. Nope. It was bad ideas. And in particular, one bad idea, which came in a variety of forms. But ultimately, it boiled down to the same thing, which is there isn't enough for everyone. And so we need to take what is there for us. Okay. And if there's other strong nations out there, they're our enemies. Sooner or later, we're going to have to fight it out with them for who gets what is there. Okay. And of course, this is a story whose consequences Poland knows very well. But I'll explain it a little more. Okay. 1912, General Friedrich von Bernhardi, who was the chief intellectual of the German General Staff, wrote a book which became an international bestseller. In English, its title is Germany in the Next War. But what he basically said was this. It says, look, here's Eurasia. Either we, the Germans, are going to get it, or the Russians are going to get it. We're the only ones powerful enough to take it all. And so we're going to have to fight them sooner or later. Should this be sooner or should it be later? Well, clearly sooner, because right now we are industrialized and they are not. And so let's take them down now. Okay. And 2 years later, the German and Austro-Hungarian leadership embraced the pretext of the assassination of the Archduke to initiate World War I and the catastrophic consequences for most of Europe. Hitler, 1939, even more hysterically, shouting, Germany needs living space. The laws of existence require uninterrupted killing so that the better may live. Okay, now this was fiction. Germany did not need living space. Germany today is significantly smaller than the Third Reich, has a larger population and a vastly higher standard of living. Why? Not because they managed to invade other countries and slaughter them or steal their cows or something. They were ultimately unsuccessful in that project, and had they succeeded, they'd actually be poorer. Okay, because actually food doesn't come from land, it comes from farmers. But putting that aside, why is Germany so much richer today than it was in the Third Reich? Well, because of the advance of science and technology, which has been a global project which has been contributed to by people of almost all nations, including very prominently people like Jews and Poles and Russians, and that they were trying to exterminate. And and had they been successful, they'd be much poorer today because of the loss of those contributions. Okay, so it was all in their heads. It was crazy, but they believed it because it seemed self-evident. There's only so much to go around, whatever. And this is the main threat to humanity today, because to most people it seems clear, even though it's not true, that the resources of the earth are finite and someone's going to get it, and other people aren't. And I happen to know for a fact that there are people in major positions of responsibility in the American national security establishment who believe that war with China is inevitable. Why? Because there's 1.4 billion of them, and if they all start driving around in cars like Americans and Europeans, there's not going to be enough oil in the world. So we have to destroy them. And you can bet your bottom dollar that there are people in Beijing who look at the world from the opposite sides of the map and think pretty much the same sorts of things, except with the other side they want to destroy. And if that kind of thinking is allowed to prevail, there's going to be war. There absolutely is going to be war, and far more devastating in consequence than raising the global temperature a degree or two over the next century. This can happen, of course, this year. We're looking at a crisis right now. And we may get past this one. Hopefully we will. But so long as people believe there's only so much to go around, we're living on borrowed time. Sooner or later, somebody's going to decide to go for it. Now, it's false. But how do we prove that it's false? Well, I could explain why the resources are not finite, because with fusion power, we'd have enough energy, we could recycle all waste and so forth. But people don't see that. To try to explain how a single planet's resources can be infinite is like trying to explain to a person who does not understand mathematics that there's an infinite number of points in a line segment. To an uneducated person, it seems obvious there can only be a finite number of points in a line segment. But anyone can see that a line that goes off infinitely in both directions has an infinite number of points. So by going into space, we make it clear that this isn't even a finite line segment. It's an infinite line. There is an infinite amount to go around in infinite space. And so the point is, what we're going to get, we're not going to get oil from Mars. We may get inventions. I believe we will get a lot of useful inventions from the Martian nations, Martian city-states. They'll certainly invent a lot of things, and that'll benefit us. But the real benefit we're going to get from Mars is not even that. What we're going to get is understanding. We're going to get an understanding that there's no point killing each other, fighting over provinces, when by working together we can open up planets. And that's the case for space. So I'd be delighted to take questions.
Okay, so we have a lot of questions actually, Robert. So let me start with one of the first one from Krzysztof. How do you assess the approach to building rockets proposed by Relativity Space, 3D printing most of it?
Well, I think 3D printing is a very promising way to produce things. Additive manufacturing can be very efficient, both in materials and in time. And I don't know how much of a rocket you can actually 3D print right now, and how that compares to more traditional methods of fabrication. But I think looking towards the future, this is the way it's going to go.
Okay, thank you. The next one I chosen from Maciek. Starship will open up possibilities for experiments and developing new technologies. You also mentioned that. Can you mention some of these kind of experiments or new technologies that could be, made by Starship?
Well, that will be enabled by Starship. That is, the Starship and what follows it, which will be more advanced starships from SpaceX and other competing types of starships from other companies and nations, Chinese knockoffs, will be cheap access to space. And in space, of course, two of the great things you have are zero gravity, which you simply cannot have on Earth, and very hard vacuum, which is extremely difficult to obtain on Earth. So there's all sorts of, I know people that actually did experiments on the space station with producing fiber optic cables in zero gravity, and they're vastly superior to anything you can produce on Earth. And there's other materials of that kind that can only be produced in zero gravity. And vacuum, well, how about fusion reactors? One of the greatest costs of fusion reactors is the vacuum chamber. And the performance of a fusion reactor goes up as the square of its characteristic dimension. I mean, we could make fusion reactors work right now if we could build them big enough. And in space, that's not an issue. So that's two of the areas. And then there's other things, there's recreational things, there's the space hotels that people talk about. And then there, yes, is astronomy. There's no better place to do astronomy than space. And to be able to access space cheaply and build space telescopes as easily, or at least comparatively so, as we can build ground telescopes. The telescopes in Chile that are being built are vastly larger than Hubble. Hubble is actually fairly small compared to ground-based observatories, but it actually is a better instrument than practically any of them because it's in space. Now imagine if we could combine those two features of size and space. What would we discover?
The next question I have from Krzysztof. That's the very interesting question also. What path would you recommend for Poland as a young player in the international space industry?
Well, I think that right now, what there really is a need for is a SpaceX for spacecraft. Okay. In other words, rather than attempt to compete head-to-head with Musk and the Chinese for space launch, although I think there's a case for Poland to have a space launch capability, both for science and also for defense purposes. If I was trying to do a company, I would think about a SpaceX for spacecraft to take the same overall methodology that Musk has developed and become a world-class, low-cost producers of spacecraft that other people could use for any number of purposes. The capital requirements for that kind of thing are much lower than for a space launch company, and there's a need for it. And I think Poland could compete well because you have technical excellence, and you have rule of law, and you have relatively low costs compared to, say, the United States or Germany or a place like that in terms of labor costs.
But we hope it will be growing. So the next question from Jędrzej: how would you restart the innovative and entrepreneurial spirit in a big company with lots of legacy and we have always done this way?
Well, if I was in a big company like Lockheed Martin, what I might do is set up a separate division that would do commercial jobs and do them in a commercial way, and would only take fixed price contracts, no cost plus contracts. Because the government contractors, or many of them, not me actually, I only do fixed price contracts, but most of the major companies do cost plus contracting, and that puts the incentives the wrong way, because actually the more overhead you have, the more money you make, which is crazy, but it's how it's done. Whereas if you do fixed price contracting, you say, here's the price, and they say, fine. And Now it's on you. If you could do it for 1/10 the price, you can make 90% profit. Okay, that's how things are done in the commercial world. As opposed to, telling the government, I'll do it and I'll charge you what it costs me plus 10%. Well, then the more it costs you, the more money you get, the bigger that 10% is. And so it's a crazy contracting system that was put in place by reformers who thought that the aerospace and other defense contractors were making too much money. So you can only get a 10% profit. Okay. So then the company said, fine, we'll just increase costs and then we'll take a 10% profit on a bigger base. And so that's what I would do. I would set up a division there. And I'd also set up an R&D division that would be free from all the constraints of purchasing of either a government or a flight organization. See, first of all, the government, I'm talking about the US government right now because I'm not acquainted with how things work in Poland. Okay, so you'll have to forgive me if none of this makes sense in the Polish context. But how it works here is, first of all, the government imposes all sorts of restrictions on who you can buy from and the process you have to use to buy it. You have to make sure that all the orders you send out are competitively bid and so forth, and that the people who are bidding it, that none of them have exhibited improper behavior in other ways, and so forth, and that they're not charging you more than a 10% profit, whatever. Okay, so it takes months to buy something when you work for these organizations. And in fact, when I worked for Lockheed Martin and we were doing an R&D project and we needed something quick, sometimes we would just go to the store and buy it with our own money when no one was watching in order to get it today instead of waiting 3 months. Now you can't do that with expensive stuff, but if you just need, activated charcoal for a filter, you can go to the pet store and buy it instead. Sure, okay, you're out $5, but at least you can do your job. Now here in my own company here, which is an R&D environment, I have no problem with buying stuff from the store, and I don't investigate them for their employment practices, their environmental practices, their gender practices, racial practices, how much profit they're making on the item. I just say, okay, this is a good price, I'm buying it. Done. And and so I can do things in 6 months that would take 3 years at Lockheed Martin. So they need to set up a division that operates an R&D division. Now, a flight system, there's another consideration, which is some of these things that they put you through when you're building a flight system actually have a degree of rationality to it. In other words, you want to make sure that the materials were never mistreated, were never left outside in winter when the temperature was 40 below, because that can actually alter the metallic structure of bolts and make them weaker. And on a flight system where one such thing fails, you lose the whole mission, you actually have to know the whole history of the part from the time it was made to when it got to you to make sure. So that adds a lot of bureaucracy and accounting, but there's a reason for it. However, in a lab environment, it's not necessary. The stakes are much lower. If I have an inferior bolt, yeah, okay, I might lose a test setup and it could cost me $10,000, but it's not going to cost me $1 billion. So rather than put up with that degree of discipline, you can operate in a much more free environment. So I would do those things. I would have a division that operates commercially, and within that division, I would have an R&D division that does not have to operate under flight discipline.
Okay, thank you. I think that we have time for like a few questions left. So the next one is from Andrzej, the Vice President of Mars Society Poland. Starship Super Heavy needs a large infrastructure to service its flight. Isn't it concerning you, the similarity to the space shuttle promises and reality?
Well, certainly there are some issues there, but they're not comparable to the space shuttle. The number of people that are needed to support a Starship launch is not remotely what is needed to support a space shuttle launch, let alone the number that were actually used to support a space shuttle launch. Because in addition to the fact that the space shuttle was much more complex and difficult to launch, there was another requirement on the shuttle, which was that it provide salary for a large fraction of the NASA workforce. That is, if you have a program, one of whose purposes is to, frankly, provide jobs, or then if you have more people assigned to it, that becomes a plus. Whereas in a business environment, obviously, the fewer people you can have do the job, it's better. So the shuttle, in addition to actually requiring a lot more people than the Starship to launch, actually was paying a lot more people than they really required.
Okay. Actually, the next question is from me, because during one of the European Rover Challenge, we hosted Jack Schmidt from Apollo 17, and we had a lot of talk about, helium-3. Everyone is talking about it and its potential for almost unlimited power on the moon. But during the last IAC in Dubai, I've gone into the amazing panel, and there was a talk of totally another solutions. For example, lunar thorium can be transformed into uranium. So the talk was, let's forget about helium-3. Let's do this by transferring the thorium into the uranium. So my question is, what do you think will be powering lunar bases? Because we are going there very quickly, and it will be first to go there and to settle. So what will be the source of energy?
Well, okay. Lunar bases will be initially powered by a mixture of photovoltaic power and nuclear fission. Okay. The case for helium-3 is, in terms of as a product of a lunar base, it has two powerful uses. One is for power on, well, first and foremost, Earth. And the advantage of running a deuterium helium-3 reactor is that it has almost no radioactive waste. So that the advantage is environmental. That is, it gets past one of the obstacles that has been thrown up in the way of the nuclear industry, which is radioactive waste. I happen to believe that case has been overdrawn. No one has ever been harmed by radioactive waste generated by fission power plants and stored, whereas something like 1 million people a year are killed by the exhaust of coal-fired power plants in terms of its effect on human health. But nevertheless, there is a desire to have a form of power that has no radioactive waste, and helium-3 will do that. Helium-3 deuterium rockets, also because all the energy comes out as charged particles, enable rockets with exhaust velocities of up to 7% the speed of light. And you can generally engineer a rocket to get up to twice its exhaust velocity. And that means we're talking about creating rockets that could get to 10% the speed of light, and which gives you a marginal capability for interstellar travel. So helium-3, See, you can't do that with nuclear fission, uranium, thorium, I don't care. You just can't do that. And that's another point. Fusion is not just another source of energy. It's a new kind of energy. And just like fission actually was a new kind of energy, for instance, yes, you can use it to generate electrical power, but there it competes with fossil fuels and other things. But you can also use it to power a submarine that can travel around the world underwater, which you simply cannot do with fossil fuels. A nuclear submarine is simply a much more capable kind of thing than a non-nuclear submarine. So in that sense, fission is a new kind. And the one place where, nuclear power has good days and bad days in terms of its commercial fortunes on land, but at sea, it is unchallenged. At sea, if you want a first-class submarine, it's got to be a nuclear submarine, period, okay? And and it's the same with fusion, okay? That is, yes, it can do a number of things that you could do by burning logs or coal or natural gas or windmills or solar panels or nuclear fission, but it can do other things that they just can't do. And that's where the helium-3 really becomes valuable.
Okay, so I have a last question because the time was speeding up. This is the question from Thomas. Thomas said, I'm already after Mars colony and Mars city-states. Yep, you remember probably that.
Right? So that's one of the Mars Society's books on Mars.
Yes, amazing book, amazing book.
Okay.
So
Which
do you think...
a number of contributions from Polish teams, I might add.
Yep. So do you think that, the question is, do you think that the lifestyle on Mars could really change the way we live on Earth?
Yes, and it will. That is, Mars colonies, Mars city-states will compete for immigrants, okay? And those that offer the greatest opportunities for humans to develop and fulfill their full human potential will attract the most immigrants, okay? And, this has been, frankly, the great strength of the United States. There were, a whole bunch of countries that people could go to in the New World. But we attracted the most talent. People wanted to come here. That's why, look, I'm not an Anglo-Saxon. Zubrin is a name that comes from your part of the world. And I don't speak Polish, and I only speak a little Russian. Americans came from everywhere, and this is, now they're not perfect, but we were better than the alternatives. And this is how it is. Now, I think there will be hundreds of city-states that people try to establish on Mars. And if you read that book, you'll see that different people have different ideas on how the government and laws and social structure of the Mars city-state should be. Some believe in social democracy, others are libertarians, and there's all sorts of things that people might try. And the ones that work the best will be the ones that attract the most immigrants. And this, by the way, is why I believe that an extraterrestrial tyranny is impossible. Some people say, oh, a space colony is going to be a tyranny because the government could turn off your air. Well, no, a tyranny would not attract any immigrants. No, it would die because it would not be able to attract immigrants. And so the founders of the United States called the United States a noble experiment. They were putting into action the ideas of 18th century liberalism as they understood them, which were certainly well known in Europe. But most of the people who advocated these ideas in Europe were viewed as pleasantly insane. There was already established ways of living. But we gave it a try in the United States, and for all of its problems, it worked so much better than everything else that people from all over the world, voted with their feet to come here and become part of it. And I think that there's a multitude of ideas that people are going to try out on Mars, and they're going to be sorted out by natural selection. Okay, the ones that work, the ones that don't work, those colonies will simply fail. And the ones that work the best and provide the best way of life will attract the most immigrants, and they will grow much more than the rest. They'll become the dominant forms. And then these ideas that might have been considered somewhat crazy on Earth, just as our ideas in America were considered crazy by ruling groups in Europe, will then become the standard, and versions of them will take place on Earth. And I'll give you a couple of examples where I think this might happen. I think actually that the biggest form of oppression that occurs on Earth right now is to the uncertified, the people who lack certificates that say that they are entitled to do things or engage in certain trades. Okay, and I'm free to make this criticism because I got all kinds of certificates. I got a PhD. Okay, but there's all sorts of trades that people would like to engage in, which they're not allowed to do until they have certificates, college degrees, what have you, that cost a lot of money and time to get, and they are excluded from engaging in those professions, even if they fully have the talent for it. Okay. Well, a Mars colony is going to have a severe labor shortage, and they're not going to be able to play those kinds of games. If somebody is able, for example, to teach, okay, they're not going to make them spend 4 years in the university before they do it. And this goes, here, I mean, people, if you want to be a barber in a barber shop here in the United States, you have to have a certificate. So, there was a time when this was not a requirement. Okay, there were other requirements that kept people out of practicing profession, but we got rid of some of those. But now we have this one, and it's the equivalent of what we call a poll tax. Like if you have a system where you charge people money to vote, well, that deters poor people from voting. Okay, well, if you have a system that people have to spend 4 years in a trade school or university before they're allowed to do something, that serves to keep out people who can't do that. And I think that this is one area of very widespread oppression on Earth today that Mars is going to throw in the wastebasket.
Okay, thank you. And I just stole the time for the last question. Thank you to organizers. I selected from Peter. What's your estimation for the time horizon for reaching profitability of setting the bio and advanced material labs to the near-Earth orbit? Role of the private entrepreneur in such?
Well, actually, I think the private orbital research labs could be profitable in the second half of this decade. I think once Starship is fully operational, then the private orbital research labs are going to become a real thing. Okay.
That was a quick answer, so I believe that organizers will allow me to ask another question. It will be really a last one, because a lot of questions, Robert, are coming to you. It's always when you are appearing. So the question is from Michał, and this is a very good question. Are humans able to survive a trip to Mars due to cosmic radiation?
Sure.
Sure. That's it?
Yeah,
That's the answer?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The cosmic ray environment on Mars, on a trip to Mars, is about twice as much as it is in low Earth orbit. Low Earth orbit, the Earth's magnetic field does not shield out cosmic rays. It shields out solar flares. but we can shield solar flares on a spacecraft by having a solar flare storm shelter with 10 centimeters of water shielding around it. You go in there if there's a solar flare. Cosmic rays, you're going to get the cosmic rays in deep space just as much as you do in Earth. It'll be a factor of 2 more because in low Earth orbit, the Earth blocks out half the sky. Okay. But look, we've had people spend a year on the space station. None of them have exhibited radiation symptoms. And we wouldn't expect them to, actually, based on what we know about radiation. The total radiation that someone is going to get going to Mars is about half a sievert delivered over 6 months. Well, actually, that's the round trip dose. That's over 2.5 years. On the one-way trip, it's about between 0.1 and 0.2 sieverts. And while that's above regulatory limits, you wouldn't see any observable effects. All the health effects that we've seen in space have been due to zero gravity exposure, not cosmic radiation. And we could, if we wanted to, get rid of the zero gravity effects by rotating the spacecraft and creating artificial gravity.
Okay, thank you, Robert. As always, it's a pleasure to host you and to talk with you. There is a lot of questions left, but I see Bartosz already over there, so he's finishing our talk. Thank you very much. There was a lot of people, watching us. I also wanted to just to mention that there is Professor Piotr Wrzecioniarz, you remember very well, so also joining with us. A lot of comments here, but we don't have time, and if we want to have all the time, we should have like 3 hours of talk with Robert, and it will be still not enough. Robert, once again, absolutely thank you for that, for inspiring us, igniting the spark. And I'm giving the back floor to Bartosz.
Thank you very much, Robert. Thank you very much,
You're most welcome.
Łukasz. It was absolutely a great hour with this dose of knowledge. I hope and I believe that we will meet again in the future and we can talk about the Mars mission, I think, human life mission. I just want to mention one more thing. Today I have a birthday and it was the best present for me. Thank you, Robert, and thank you all the audience.
Well, once again, thanks for inviting me, and look forward to doing this again. And I know there's going to be a European rover challenge this fall in Poland, and I don't know if I can make it in person, but I'll certainly, if I can't make it, to speak there by Zoom. And people will have more chances to ask me questions then.
Great, thank you very much, Robert. And I would like just mention about our next guest. In the March at the beginning, March 2nd, we will have Abby Lundberg from MIT Sloan. Thank you very much once again. Thank you for our partners. Thank you, audience. And Robert, have a great time in the US. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Dziękujemy bardzo. Do zobaczenia.